I came to find peace in the temple, but found chaos in his eyes instead. What fra that doi suthep was supposed to be a spiritual experience. At least that's what every guidebook and travel blog had promised. Perched high on the mountain overlooking Chiang Mai, accessible only by a winding road that made my stomach question every life choice I'd ever made, it was meant to be the crown jewel of northern Thai temple architecture. What none of those sources had mentioned was how spectacularly I could embarrass myself within the first 5 minutes of arrival. The stairs are traditional, Kamon explained as we stood at the base of what looked like approximately 3,000 steps leading up to the temple complex. 306 steps, each one representing a step closer to enlightenment. I looked up at the seemingly endless staircase, flanked by ornate naga serpents whose golden scales caught the morning sun. And there's no elevator? His laugh was warm and indulgent. Afraid not. But the view from the top is worth it, I promise. Everything about this trip is worth it, I thought, watching the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. Especially the company. The climb itself wasn't terrible, I was in decent shape, and Kamon set an easy pace that let me actually look around instead of just focusing on not collapsing. But it was when we reached the temple proper that my cultural ignorance decided to make its grand debut. Remember, Kamon said as we approached the main shrine, shoes off, head uncovered, and when you bow, it's 3 times. For the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. I nodded confidently, slipped off my sneakers, and promptly proceeded to demonstrate every possible way to bow incorrectly. First attempt. Too fast, nearly lost my balance and somehow managed to bow toward the wrong statue entirely. Second attempt. Overcorrected the speed, moved so slowly that I looked like I was doing some kind of interpretive dance. Third attempt. Got the speed right but forgot about the 3 times part and stood up after 1 bow, leaving me awkwardly half-bent while trying to remember what came next. By the time I'd finished my disastrous tribute to Buddhist protocol, I was red-faced and thoroughly convinced that I'd somehow managed to offend every monk, tourist, and golden Buddha statue within a 5-mile radius. That was... I started to apologize, but Kamon was doing something I hadn't expected. He was trying very hard not to laugh. "I'm sorry," he said, pressing his lips together in a failed attempt at seriousness. "It's not funny. You're trying and that's what matters." "It's totally funny," I said, relief flooding through me. "I just performed what was probably the most offensive interpretive dance in Buddhist history." That broke his composure completely. His laughter rang out across the temple courtyard, genuine and delighted, and I found myself laughing too, partly at my own incompetence, but mostly at the way his whole face lit up when he was truly amused. "Come on," he said when we'd both recovered. "Let me show you the proper way. And maybe somewhere a little more private so you can practice without an audience." He led me to a smaller shrine tucked away in a quieter corner of the complex, where ancient trees provided shade and the constant stream of tourists thinned to just the occasional monk going about his daily routine. "Okay," Kamon said, positioning himself beside me. "Watch first, then copy. And don't worry, the Buddha has infinite patience for sincere attempts." I watched as he moved through the ritual with practiced grace, hands pressed together in prayer position, the smooth descent to his knees, the deep bow that somehow managed to be both humble and dignified. Everything about his movement was fluid, respectful, beautiful. "Your turn," he said softly. This time I managed something that at least resembled proper form. Not graceful, certainly not as natural as Kamon's movements, but recognizably intentional rather than accidentally comedic. "Better," he said, and I felt a ridiculous surge of pride at his approval. "Much better." We settled onto a low stone bench in the shade, the temple bells creating a gentle soundtrack to the afternoon. From our vantage point, we could see all of Chiang Mai spread out below us, the old city walls, the modern sprawl beyond, the mountains rolling away into blue distance. "It's incredible," I said, fumbling for my camera. "The view, the architecture, all of it." "First time in a Buddhist temple?" "First time anywhere like this," I admitted, adjusting my camera settings. "I grew up going to a Methodist church in suburban Seattle. Very different aesthetic." "What was that like?" I considered the question while framing a shot of the golden Chedi gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Quiet. Predictable. Good people mostly, but..." I paused, trying to find the right words. "Safe, I guess." "Everything was very safe." "Safe isn't always bad." "No," I agreed, lowering my camera to look at him. "But sometimes safe means not really living, you know? Not taking chances, not pushing boundaries, not figuring out who you really are when no one's watching." Something in his expression shifted, became more intent. "Is that what you're doing here? Figuring out who you really are?" The question hit deeper than I'd expected. I'd been asking myself the same thing for months, ever since the layoffs had forced me to confront the fact that I'd been sleepwalking through my own life. Maybe, I said honestly. Back home, everything was just automatic. Wake up, go to work, come home, watch Netflix, sleep, repeat. I had this whole life planned out that wasn't actually mine, if that makes sense. It makes perfect sense, Kamon said quietly. I think a lot of people live lives that aren't really theirs. What about you? I asked. Is this life yours? He was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the city below. I thought it was, he said finally. I love this place, love showing people what makes it special. But lately... He trailed off, then shook his head. Sorry, you didn't come here to listen to me have an existential crisis. Actually, I kind of did, I said, and his surprised look made me clarify. Not the crisis part, but getting to know you. Learning about your life, your perspective. That's the best part of traveling, isn't it? The people you meet. Especially when those people make your heart do acrobatics every time they smile, I added silently. Even when those people watch you completely butcher sacred rituals? Especially then, I grinned. Shows character. He laughed again, and I found myself studying his profile as he looked out over the view. The strong line of his jaw, the way his hair caught the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees, the small scar above his eyebrow that I was becoming increasingly curious about. Can I ask you something? I said before I could lose my nerve. Of course. The scar. Above your eyebrow. Is there a story there? His hand went unconsciously to the small mark. Childhood accident. I was 7 trying to climb a mango tree that was way too tall for me. Emma always says it's fitting, I've been reaching for things just out of grasp ever since. Emma seems to have a lot of opinions about your life choices. She does, he agreed with fond exasperation. But she's usually right, which is annoying. She says I'm too careful, too worried about what could go wrong instead of focusing on what could go right. And what does she think could go right? The question hung between us, loaded with implications I wasn't sure either of us was ready to address directly. Kamon met my eyes, and for a moment, the air felt charged with the same electricity I'd felt at the night market. I think, he said carefully, she thinks I should be braver about pursuing things that matter to me. Things like what? Like... He paused, seemed to weigh his words. Like not letting good opportunities pass by because I'm overthinking them. I had the distinct feeling we weren't just talking about career opportunities, but I wasn't quite brave enough to push further. Instead, I raised my camera again, ostensibly to capture more of the temple complex but really to have something to do with my hands that wasn't reaching for his. Can I take your picture? I asked. The light is perfect right now. He looked surprised. Me? If you don't mind. You look... I trailed off, realizing I'd been about to say something embarrassingly honest like beautiful, or perfect, or like something I want to remember forever. I look what? Natural, I settled on. Like you belong here. He did belong here, I realized as I watched him through the camera lens. Not just in the temple but in this place, this country, this moment. There was something about the way he moved through the world that spoke of deep roots, of understanding his place in the larger tapestry of things. Unlike me, who felt like I was constantly improvising. Tell me about growing up here, I said, continuing to take photos as he spoke. What was it like? Loud, he said with a smile. Lots of family, lots of opinions about everything. My grandmother lived with us. She's the one who taught me about Buddhism, about tradition. My parents were more focused on the practical side of things. They run a small tour company, which is how I got into guiding. Family business? Sort of. I was supposed to take it over eventually, but... He shrugged. I'm not sure that's what I want anymore. What do you want? The question was out before I could stop it, too personal and too loaded for our 3rd day of knowing each other. But instead of deflecting, Kamon considered it seriously. I want to travel, he said finally. See other places, other cultures. Learn languages. Maybe write about it or teach or... He laughed self-consciously. I know it sounds naive, especially coming from someone who spends his days showing tourists around. But I've never been anywhere except Thailand. That doesn't sound naive at all, I said, lowering my camera to look at him directly. It sounds brave. Brave would be actually doing it instead of just talking about it. Sometimes talking about it is the first step. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching monks going about their evening routines, listening to the temple bells and the distant sounds of the city below. The afternoon light was beginning to golden, casting everything in warm honey tones that made the temple's gold leaf decorations gleam like fire. I should probably head back soon, I said reluctantly. Malaya mentioned something about dinner, and I get the feeling she's the type to worry if I'm late. She is, Kamon confirmed, standing and stretching. Very motherly. She's probably already started cooking. We made our way back through the temple complex, past the main shrine where I'd had my earlier mishap, down the endless stairs that were somehow both easier and harder on the way down. By the time we reached Kamon's truck, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange that would have been embarrassingly cliché if they weren't so breathtaking. "Thank you," I said as we drove back down the winding mountain road. "For today, for being patient with my complete lack of cultural awareness, for—" I gestured vaguely. "Everything. Thank you for letting me see it through your eyes," he replied. "It's easy to take things for granted when you see them every day." When we pulled up outside Malaya's guest house, neither of us moved immediately. The evening air was soft and fragrant, filled with the sounds of the city winding down for the night. I could see warm light spilling from the guest house windows, could smell something delicious cooking somewhere nearby. "Tomorrow?" Kamon asked, echoing our routine from the night before. "Tomorrow," I agreed. But this time when I started to get out of the truck, he caught my arm gently. "Ryan." I turned back, suddenly very aware of how close we were in the confines of the truck cab, how his hand was still resting on my arm, how his eyes seemed to hold something he wasn't quite ready to say. "I'm glad you're here," he said quietly. "In Chiang Mai, I mean. It's nice having someone to share it with." "Me too," I said, my voice coming out rougher than intended. "I'm glad I'm here too." For a moment I thought he might say something else, might bridge the gap between what we were saying and what we both seemed to be feeling. But then he released my arm with a soft smile and the moment passed. "Sleep well," he said. "You too." I made it halfway to the guest house before I realized I was grinning like an idiot. Whatever was happening between us, friendship, attraction, something else entirely, it was happening. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was excited to find out what came next. Even if it meant more embarrassing temple mishaps along the way.